It was a bright Saturday afternoon, and the downtown crowd had spilled into every corner of Gold Star Electronics. The store was buzzing with customers, the sound of chatter blending with the constant beeps of cash registers. Behind the counter, the store owner, Mr. Harper, strutted around like he owned not just the shop, but the entire street. His polished shoes clicked loudly against the floor, gold rings glinting on his fingers, and a smirk played across his face as he barked orders at his employees. In the middle of all this chaos, the door opened quietly. No fanfare, no entourage, just a man in simple jeans, a faded jacket, and worn-out shoes. His calm face and composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the flashy atmosphere of the store. He walked in slowly, scanning the aisles without hurry. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate, and somehow commanding. This was Steven Seagal. Mr. Harper noticed him immediately. A new face, no purchases yet, no flashy gadgets. He smirked, thinking this was just another ordinary customer he could put in his place. "Can I help you?" Harper asked, leaning over the counter with a sneer. The man nodded politely. "Yes, I'd like to return an item and make a small purchase." Harper laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the store. "Return something? What are you, broke? We don't serve dreamers or paupers here. Only real clients, people who know how to spend money." Customers turned to look, some trying to hide their smirks, others whispering in disbelief. But Steven didn't flinch. His eyes remained calm, his face unreadable, like he was letting Harper make a fool of himself. The tension in the air thickened. Every employee froze, sensing that something unusual was happening. The regular hum of the store faded into a heavy silence, broken only by Harper's arrogant laughter. Steven pulled out a small piece of paper from his pocket, a simple check. Harper, thinking it was worthless, barely glanced at it. Then he made the mistake that would turn the entire store upside down. "Let me see that." "Huh. You think this little thing can impress me? Pathetic. Get out before I call security." With that, he ripped the check in half, letting it flutter to the floor. A faint smell of burnt edges hung in the air, though no one realized yet that this simple act would become a moment nobody in Gold Star Electronics would ever forget. And just as Harper's laughter faded, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile appeared on Steven's face, hinting that the man he had insulted was no ordinary customer. The store had returned to its usual hum, but a strange tension lingered in the air. Customers continued browsing, though many cast curious glances toward the counter, whispering among themselves. Harper, still smirking, waved dismissively at his employees. He thought the incident with the pauper customer was over, just another funny story to tell his staff later. But Steven Seagal wasn't done. He moved with an almost silent grace, as if the floor itself acknowledged his presence. He approached the counter again, this time slowly, deliberately. Harper's laughter died down, replaced by mild irritation. He crossed his arms and leaned against the counter, trying to regain his authority. "Sir," Harper said with a forced smile, "I hope this isn't going to be another one of those complicated returns. We have policies, you know. Can't just take anything back." Steven nodded calmly. "I understand. I just need to deposit this check and make a purchase." He slid the paper across the counter without any flourish, his hand steady, almost challenging Harper to react. Harper picked up the check casually, glancing at the amount. His eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second, but pride and arrogance wouldn't let him acknowledge it. Instead, he laughed, louder this time, though now slightly forced. "Huh. That's funny. You really think that tiny scrap of paper means anything? I deal with real clients here, people who understand value. Not dreamers or fools." The employees exchanged nervous glances. Some had begun to suspect there was more to this man than met the eye. A few whispered quietly to one another. One young clerk, Emily, leaned closer to her colleague. "Have you seen him before? He feels different somehow." The other shrugged. "I don't know, but don't mess with him. There's something about the way he carries himself." Steven Seagal remained completely composed, his calm aura contrasting sharply with Harper's bluster. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He simply smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and said, "Sometimes arrogance blinds people to what's in front of them. Be careful, mister." Harper waved off the comment. "Harper, "Clark Harper," he said, puffing out his chest. "And I suggest you be careful about wasting my time." Customers were now fully aware of the tension. Some subtly started filming on their phones. The whispering grew louder. Harper, oblivious to the growing attention, flicked open his lighter as a gesture of mockery, as if daring Steven to impress him with that tiny check. "Let's see how serious you are," Harper sneered. "Prove me wrong, or get out." He held the check over the trash bin, ready to make a show of burning it again, not realizing that the stakes were much higher than he imagined. Meanwhile, Steven's calm gaze swept across the store, landing briefly on each person who had stopped to watch. There was no fear, no anger, only quiet observation. And with each second, the sense that he was someone extraordinary grew stronger in the minds of the onlookers. Emily, the young clerk, whispered under her breath, "I've seen him before. In movies, maybe? Or some business articles. That face. It's familiar." "Doesn't matter," her colleague replied softly. "Just don't get in the way of whatever's coming." Harper, still unaware of what he had triggered, let his ego take full control. "I don't have time for small-time people thinking they can waltz in here and make a scene. This is my store, my rules." And then, Steven spoke, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying a weight that seemed to fill the entire store. "Sometimes, the person you underestimate is the one with the power to change everything." A hush fell over the customers. Even the employees stopped moving. Every eye was now on Steven Seagal. The simple act of writing and presenting a check had become a subtle yet undeniable statement of authority. Harper, still blinded by arrogance, didn't yet realize the storm he had invited into his store. The moment was hanging in the air, charged and silent, like the calm before a lightning strike. And as Steven reached for the counter with quiet precision, it became clear. What happened next would be unforgettable for everyone in that store. The air in Gold Star Electronics had grown heavy, thick with anticipation. Every customer had stopped what they were doing, and even the cash registers seemed to hum a quieter, nervous tune. Harper's laughter, once so confident and brash, had slowed to a forced chuckle. He still held the check in his hand, unaware of the true value it represented, or perhaps arrogantly refusing to acknowledge it. "Let me see that again," Harper said, squinting at the paper as if it might magically shrink in value. "You expect me to believe this tiny slip can impress anyone? $500,000. Huh, that's funny. Really funny." He leaned over the counter, waving the check in the air as if demonstrating his superiority, and smirked. "Do you think flashing a piece of paper makes you someone special? I deal with real clients, not children playing business games." Customers whispered among themselves. Some were holding their phones, recording every moment. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances. There was a strange energy in the store now, a quiet tension, almost like the calm before a storm. Steven Seagal didn't flinch. His gaze remained calm, almost piercing. "Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see," he said softly, his voice calm yet unmistakably commanding. His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Harper's grin faltered. His fingers tightened around the check, but pride would not allow him to back down. "Nice speech," he scoffed, trying to regain control of the situation. "But words don't impress me. Get out before I call security. I don't tolerate." In a single, almost careless motion, Harper crumpled the check in his hands and tossed it toward the trash bin behind him. The crowd gasped as the check fluttered down, landing half in, half out of the bin. The aroma of burning edges soon followed, as Harper, in a dramatic gesture meant to humiliate, flicked his lighter over the paper. A small flame licked the edges, and smoke began curling upward. "Is this a joke?" one customer whispered, while another muttered, "He can't be serious." But Steven Seagal didn't move. He didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't even flinch. He simply stood there, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to Harper's flailing arrogance. The silence in the store became almost unbearable, every eye locked on the man who had been insulted and yet showed no visible sign of anger. Emily, the young clerk who had first noticed something familiar about Steven, whispered to her colleague, "That face. I know it. Movies, TV, business. It feels like someone important." Her colleague nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, he's not ordinary. Look at how calm he is." And look at Harper. He's terrified and doesn't even know it. Harper, oblivious to the subtle shift in power, continued his theatrics. I run this store. I make the rules. You think you can walk in here and challenge me? He took another swing at crumpling the check, letting a small piece fall to the floor, unaware that every movement only drew more attention from the watching crowd. Steven finally moved. Just a step forward, slow, measured. His hand reached for the counter, his eyes locking with Harper's. Power isn't shown by intimidation or money, he said quietly, yet every word carried weight. It's shown by respect. And respect is earned, not demanded. A hush fell over the store. The customers, employees, even the nearby manager in the next section, all froze. Harper's confident stance wavered for the first time. He glanced around, realizing that the crowd was no longer on his side. Murmurs of disbelief and admiration for Steven filled the store. Do you understand now? Steven asked, his calm smile unwavering. Sometimes the person you dismiss, the person you underestimate, is the one with the power to change everything around you. Harper's ego faltered. His fingers loosened around the lighter, and for a brief moment, the bravado that had defined him evaporated. He looked at Steven, finally seeing not just a customer, but a presence, someone far more powerful than he had imagined. The check burned slowly in the bin, its smoke curling toward the ceiling. And in that suspended moment, everyone in Gold Star Electronics understood that this was no ordinary confrontation. This was a lesson in humility, patience, and the quiet, undeniable power of respect. The small plume of smoke from the burning check curled upward, twisting lazily toward the ceiling, but it seemed heavier than air, as if the store itself was holding its breath. Customers froze mid-step, eyes wide, phones out but trembling slightly. Some had been recording Harper's arrogance earlier, now they were documenting something far bigger, an atmosphere so charged that even the most ordinary Saturday afternoon seemed extraordinary. Harper's grin had vanished completely. He fumbled with his lighter, unsure whether to snuff it out or let the paper continue its slow destruction. His confidence, once so absolute, had begun to crumble under Steven Seagal's unwavering gaze. The very air seemed to hum with silent authority as Steven stood perfectly still, eyes calm, watching, assessing, commanding without moving a muscle. One of the customers whispered, almost to herself, "Who is he, really?" Another murmur passed through the crowd, "That's not just a man, that's someone you don't mess with." Even the youngest employee, barely old enough to grasp the situation, was frozen in awe. Every person in the store seemed to recognize, some instinctively, some consciously, that they were witnessing more than a confrontation. They were witnessing a lesson in respect. Emily, the young clerk who had first noticed something familiar about Steven, felt a chill run down her spine. She whispered to a colleague, "I've seen him somewhere, movies, action scenes, maybe a business interview?" That face. Her voice trailed off. Her eyes stayed locked on Steven, who remained calm, unflustered, and almost impossibly in control. Harper, however, still clung to his illusion of authority. He waved the lighter like a scepter, forcing a laugh that came out hollow. "You think standing there like that makes you powerful," he barked, voice cracking slightly. "You're just some customer. Just some customer." The irony of his words was not lost on anyone. He had insulted a man he had assumed powerless, only to face the silent, undeniable presence of someone far above him in stature and influence. Steven finally exhaled, a small movement, barely noticeable. His calmness radiated outward like a wave, washing over the room. "Power," he said softly, "isn't measured by money, loud voices, or threats. It's measured by respect, patience, and humility." The silence in the store deepened. Even the air seemed to pause, acknowledging the weight of his words. Some customers began to murmur to one another, exchanging glances of understanding. Phones clicked, recording the moment, not just Harper's humiliation, but the quiet authority of the man he had tried to demean. Then, a subtle shift occurred. Harper's bravado cracked further. His face paled, his hands trembled slightly. For the first time, he realized something he had long ignored. This man was not just a customer. He wasn't here to be impressed or placated. He was here to expose arrogance for what it truly was. Emily gasped softly. It can't be," she whispered. "I've seen that face in headlines, interviews, maybe even in charity events. He's someone huge. The other employees were equally stunned, the realization settling slowly. Harper tried to regain control. I think you're overreacting, he stammered, his usual arrogance nowhere to be found. But Steven didn't answer. He didn't need to. His calm, almost imperceptible smile said it all. The man who had been insulted, mocked, and underestimated was quietly, yet overwhelmingly, in control of the entire room. Then, the door at the front of the store opened slightly, letting in a sudden draft. Customers instinctively turned, their attention momentarily shifting, but all eyes soon returned to Steven. That single motion seemed to signal that something bigger was about to happen, something that would completely change Harper's understanding of who he was dealing with. And in that charged silence, the reality became clear. Harper had just insulted a man far beyond his comprehension, and the entire store was about to witness the consequences. A storm of realization, embarrassment, and awe was just beginning to descend. The tension in Gold Star Electronics was almost unbearable. Customers, employees, and even nearby passers-by had stopped to watch, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Harper's confidence had evaporated entirely. He shifted nervously, glancing at Steven Seagal, trying to measure whether this man was truly just another customer, or something far more formidable. Suddenly, the quiet hum of the street outside was interrupted by the roar of a sleek black car pulling up at the store entrance. Its engine purred like a beast ready to pounce. A moment later, 3 sharply dressed executives strode into the store, carrying folders, documents, and briefcases. They moved with precision, their eyes fixed on Steven, their expressions a mix of urgency and reverence. "Mr. Seagal," one of them called, hurrying toward him. "We've been waiting for you, sir. Everything is ready as you requested." Harper's eyes widened, his jaw dropping. He took a step back, unsure if he had just misheard. "Wait. Mr. Seagal? That's him." His voice trembled with disbelief. "Yes," the lead executive said calmly. "He's the new majority owner of this chain. Gold Star Electronics has been under his oversight since this morning. All operations, all decisions, are now under his authority." The store erupted in murmurs. Customers exchanged incredulous looks. Phones clicked as everyone tried to capture this shocking moment. Harper's mind raced. The man he had insulted, belittled, and mocked had just revealed himself as the very owner of the empire he thought he controlled. Emily, the young clerk, whispered in awe to her colleague, "I knew it! I told you he wasn't ordinary. Look at him. That calm face. He's a force." Harper stammered, struggling to regain his composure. I didn't. I thought." Steven finally spoke, his voice calm yet unmistakably authoritative. "You thought I was just another customer, a man to mock. But that assumption is exactly what allowed your arrogance to blind you. I came here to make a deposit, and instead, I came to make a change." A collective gasp swept through the store. Customers leaned in, employees froze, and even Harper felt his stomach drop. He had underestimated the man he had insulted, and now the consequences were undeniable. The executives handed Steven a few folders. He glanced over them briefly, nodding as if confirming everything was in order. Harper, unable to hide his shock any longer, whispered, I should leave, right?" His usual bluster had completely vanished, replaced by a nervous awe. Steven's eyes met his. "You made a choice," he said simply. "A choice to insult, belittle, and disrespect. Some might argue I could fire you immediately. But true power doesn't always respond with punishment. Sometimes it responds with a lesson." The customers leaned forward, captivated. The murmurs had grown louder, people murmuring to each other, "Wow, he's not just an action star, he's the owner?" "Harper, he's the boss now." Steven turned slightly to address the store. "From today onward, this store, and every employee in it, should remember that respect is earned, not demanded. Your attitude toward others is always noticed, even when you think no one is watching." Harper's knees wobbled slightly. He looked at the ground, unable to meet Steven's calm, piercing gaze. He realized that this man, once just a customer in his eyes, now held the ultimate authority over him. Every arrogant word, every mocking gesture, Every laugh at what he assumed was a small-time customer had led to this humbling moment. The executives quietly arranged the documents, and Steven gave Harper one final look, a look that was calm, measured, yet full of silent judgment. "I came to deposit a check," he said softly, almost as an afterthought, "but I leave you with a reminder, never underestimate anyone, and always respect those around you." Harper's ego had crumbled entirely. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a physical force. He opened his mouth to speak, but found no words that could undo the damage. The store, now silent except for the faint rustle of papers and the hum of electronics, seemed to exhale collectively, everyone understanding the lesson Steven had delivered without raising his voice. In that moment, everyone in Gold Star Electronics realized the man they had laughed at, mocked, and underestimated was now the single most powerful figure in the room. And Harper had just learned a lesson that would stay with him for life. Harper's knees buckled slightly as the full weight of the situation sank in. The man he had insulted, mocked, and humiliated was not just any customer. He was the very owner of Gold Star Electronics. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. His usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by a trembling vulnerability. "Sir, I'm so sorry," Harper finally stammered, his voice cracking. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean any of it. Please, forgive me." Steven Seagal regarded him calmly. There was no anger, no vindictiveness in his eyes, only a quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire store. He took a measured step forward and spoke, his voice calm yet commanding. "That's exactly the problem, Mr. Harper. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Arrogance makes you blind, but humility keeps you aware. Learn this lesson, and you'll never be caught off guard again." The customers who had been filming the confrontation felt a collective sense of awe. Many whispered to each other, "He's teaching a lesson without raising his voice. That's true power." Phones clicked as some captured Steven's calm words, knowing this moment was unforgettable. Emily, the young clerk who had first sensed something special about Steven, watched intently. She had stayed respectful throughout, quietly observing and doing her job without judgment or mockery. Steven's eyes briefly met hers, and there was a subtle nod of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of her composure. "From today," Steven continued, turning to the store, "loyalty and respect are the true measures of a person. Actions speak louder than arrogance. Those who uphold respect will thrive. Those who belittle others will learn a lesson, sometimes the hard way." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Harper swallowed hard, nodding repeatedly, his pride completely shattered. The employees around him murmured quietly, some exchanging glances of admiration, others silently thanking Steven for restoring a sense of fairness and justice in the store. Then Steven made a simple but powerful decision. He walked over to Emily. "You," he said softly but clearly, "have shown respect, humility, and composure throughout this entire situation. From today onward, you will have increased responsibility here. Consider yourself the branch supervisor for this location." Emily's eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to comprehend the recognition. The other employees looked on in amazement. Steven had rewarded respect rather than punishing arrogance. The lesson was clear: humility is always recognized, even if it seems unnoticed in the moment. Harper finally spoke again, his voice quiet and contrite. "Sir, I don't deserve this. I made a mistake that will stay with me forever. Thank you for showing me the right way." Steven gave a faint smile, a calm, knowing expression that carried far more weight than words ever could. "Remember this day," he said softly. "Respect is not about fear, money, or authority. It's about how you treat others when you think no one is watching. That is the measure of true strength." With that, Steven turned toward the door. He walked with the same quiet authority he had displayed since entering the store, leaving behind a room full of stunned customers, humbled employees, and one very humbled store owner. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for a moment, the store was silent, absorbing the weight of the lesson that had just been delivered. Harper sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Emily looked around at the employees, many of whom were still murmuring softly about the extraordinary man who had walked into their lives and left an indelible mark. The customers gradually returned to browsing, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Respect, humility, and awareness now hung in the air like an invisible lesson, lingering long after Steven had gone. And so, a day that had begun with arrogance and insult ended with a quiet, unforgettable display of moral authority, one that would remain in the minds of everyone present for a lifetime. As the door to Gold Star Electronics closed behind Steven Seagal, a hush fell over the store. Customers, employees, and even Harper himself stood frozen, absorbing what had just happened. It wasn't just the shock of the reveal, or the unexpected authority of Steven Seagal. It was the lesson that lingered quietly in the air, stronger than any spoken command or flashy display of power. Harper sank into a chair, his head still bowed, replaying every arrogant word and gesture he had made earlier. Every insult, every smirk, every mocking tone, it all seemed unbearably small now. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that true strength doesn't come from wealth, status, or loud displays of authority. It comes from humility, patience, and the ability to respect others, regardless of who they are or what they can offer you in return. The employees, especially Emily, felt a shift in the atmosphere of the store. A sense of clarity and calm replaced the earlier tension. They had witnessed firsthand that respect is earned, and arrogance can crumble in an instant when faced with quiet authority and moral confidence. Many whispered to each other, still capturing the moment on their phones, "That man didn't even shout. He didn't need to. That was pure power." Steven's actions had left an indelible mark on everyone. He had arrived as a simple customer, underestimated and mocked, yet he left as the embodiment of a principle everyone would remember. The true measure of a person is not how they dominate others, but how they conduct themselves when faced with arrogance and disrespect. Harper finally raised his head, his voice trembling but sincere. I understand now," he said softly. "I've been blind. I treated people poorly without realizing the consequences. I will never forget this lesson." His apology was no longer forced. It came from the genuine weight of recognition. Emily, who had stayed composed throughout, smiled faintly. Steven had acknowledged her calmness and respect in front of everyone. She realized that sometimes the quiet actions, the restraint, and the humility are the ones that get noticed the most, and often rewarded in ways beyond material gain. Outside, life carried on as usual. Cars passed, pedestrians walked by, and the world seemed unchanged. Yet, within the walls of Gold Star Electronics, something profound had shifted. The arrogance that had dominated the store for years had been replaced by a quiet awareness. Respect was no longer optional. It had become a principle, embedded in the minds of those who had witnessed Steven's example. Steven Seagal, meanwhile, walked down the street with his characteristic calm. No one followed, no one cheered. He didn't need validation. His lesson had been delivered not through force, but through presence, action, and the quiet, undeniable weight of integrity. Every step he took seemed to leave an invisible imprint of morality and respect, a reminder that true power is silent, patient, and unwavering. Back in the store, employees began to reorganize, but the earlier conversations had shifted. They spoke about humility, about observing others, about how one's actions, even in seemingly small encounters, can have lasting effects. Harper, still humbled, began considering ways to rebuild trust and respect among his staff. He realized that leadership is not about asserting dominance, but about fostering dignity and understanding for everyone who walks through the doors. For the customers who had witnessed the scene, the story would be told repeatedly. Phones would capture moments, videos would circulate, and each retelling would carry the same lesson. Never underestimate anyone, always show respect, and remember that humility is the foundation of true strength. Steven's final impact was simple yet profound. He had turned a humiliating encounter into a universal moral lesson, one that transcended wealth, status, or celebrity. He had reminded everyone that respect is not conditional on who someone is, but on how we choose to treat others. So, as you read this, remember, true power is silent. True respect is earned. Humility is strength. Treat others with dignity, even when no one is watching. Because one day, the person you underestimate may be the very one who changes your world. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is real strength. And share where you're watching from. I want to honor every kind soul who understands that true power comes from respect, patience, and integrity.